So this is an official welcome to this webinar this afternoon, Understanding an EHCP. My name's Hilary Nuns. I'm the founder of Can Do Courses, and Can Do Courses, we run a lot of training for teachers and support staff in behaviour management and lots of other special educational needs. Now this Can Do conversation today, and I'm talking to myself really because normally I'm talking to somebody else, but the reason I decided to put it on was because this bit, Understanding an EHCP, forms part of one of the accredited programs that we run, and people are always asking me for a bit more information about an education and healthcare plan because they've heard of it, but they've never seen one, or they've seen a small part of one, and they're not really sure how that translates and relates to the students that they are working with. And, you know, there are hundreds of people on this webinar this afternoon, and that tells me that somehow in our system, in our education system, we have failed to make this information available. So, you know, you're not going to be an expert by the time we reach the end of our 25 minutes, but it will give you a bit more of an understanding. So this is it really in a nutshell. In 2015, it was a phased introduction that changed the old type of statement of educational needs, which ended at age 16, and it became, you know, in pre-EHCP, if you work in further education, you'll know that at the age of 16, you had to reapply, or you may get a section 139A statement of educational needs. So what they've tried to do is to make it a bit more joined up so that people speak to each other beyond the age of 16, and also that it you know, goes on to adulthood age 25, so that there's a transition period when you leave the regimented section of education and go into other areas of life. So fantastic. I mean, that's how it should be. Obviously it does mean it's supposed to be very much more accessible to have information about the people that you're working with. But I do know that in some pockets of the country, it's been very slow to roll out efficiently. However, we need to understand the framework. There are categories in the EHCP, and in those categories, they kind of have subcategories. What I've noticed about information I've been given in the past is that it seems a bit full of jargon, and it doesn't mean anything to me, and sometimes the information that's been given is outdated. So, you know, it could be that a good piece of work's been put together for someone who's age 12 going into secondary school, but when they then become 16 and go into college, it really isn't the same. So I always think that the third part of this is to ask the student, because they can tell you normally, if they are in a mainstream environment, foundation learning, even some pre-entry, they can tell you what it is that they need in the ways of additional support. But, you know, there's people, quite a lot of people still in support roles in classrooms who never see them, They aren't information that they get given. They're almost privileged information. But if you are, you might just be given a heading or a category and not really sure what might be covered within that. So we'll go through it, and then you'll see what I mean as we unravel it. So here's one of the categories, the educational one, which is cognition and learning, and that's the one possibly is the most common. If you're working in a mainstream environment, then that's the most common category, I would guess. So the way it has been broken down there is that we want students to be able to reach their potential in a supportive and specialist environment that can meet all of their needs, all their special educational needs. So in class, it's all about learning. What I do know is that sometimes our approach to the exam system is that it's very boring, and if you are the type of person who doesn't process things at the same speed or find it difficult to pay attention for long periods of time, then you would be very likely to be in receipt of extra support. Okay, So that's the kind of cognition and learning. But let's break it down even further. Here are all the subcategories. Within these, there would be a specifics for the individual. But if you look, level of interest in learning activities, learning style. Now, most people will tell you that learning styles have been debunked, but there we are. Engaging task, processing abilities, auditory and visual. You know, there's a lot here around reading and comprehension, literacy skills, numeracy skills, sequencing, so being able to follow patterns of information and have building blocks of knowledge, solving problems, memory, well, dyspraxic, and orientation. We've got here quite a lot, I think you'll agree. And if you try to break that down, if I was to say to you, right, which one of these would apply to somebody who has ADHD, you'd be able to pick out the bits that they may struggle with. So you can see that within this one subcategory, there are quite a few things here which might be applied to somebody who has ADHD, and similarly, somebody with poor literacy skills or dyslexia. You can pick them out. You can see how they might be assessed in order to get this additional support. There's stuff here for people with autism as well, and I would say also with poor numeracy, the dyscalculia. So this is all about providing extra support for somebody in a classroom or a learning environment. So that might help. If you see that you've got somebody with ADHD, then this may be part of their support package that they're going to be offered. It could be to do with their short-term and working memory, retaining and interpreting information, for example. Okay, so here's a couple of things of dyslexia support, just a quick tip here. If you're going to try and make your classroom user-friendly for someone with dyslexia, try and make sure that all of the resources that you make are very uncluttered. So bullet points are good, kind of makes things jump out. Diagrams are good, lots of graphics. Colour, they say to avoid black on white, which is our standard printing option, isn't it? Printing on coloured paper is quite expensive, but what I know when I've been in arenas where we've supported students with dyslexia, that they've provided the colour paper so that we can do that for them if budget is an issue, which often is. And also I carry around with me a yellow plastic folder. Sometimes the students I come in touch with don't know whether they would prefer to come off a white background and onto a pastel one. So I've just got a little plastic folder and I stick a piece of resource within the folder and say, is that better? And if they say, oh yeah, that's fantastic, then you know that's going to be something that they could work with. So that's a little top tip. And make sure your font size is unfussy. Now if you look at the screen, there's no real tails on that font. That's Arial, I think I've got up on there. Anyway, that's a little bit tip on dyslexia. Let's go on to the next bit. Here's another category, speech, language and communication. And the example given is to achieve better communication skills and make friends. So, well, that sounds fair enough. I mean, most people need to have friends because it helps with mental health, etc. But speech, language and communication, they're jumped together. And it may be that you've seen this on paperwork and have assumed that it's someone who has a speech impediment or doesn't speak the language, but it isn't like that. And here are the subcategories. So here we are. You can see there's an awful lot here that relates to autism. Expressive and functional language, use of greetings, echolalia, which is part of the autism spectrum, initiation of verbal communication. That's again, I would put that as part of communication problems on the spectrum. But on the other side, on the right hand side, there are still some which might relate quite a lot to autism, but it also could be for people who are deaf, couldn't it? Could be that they need sign language or Makaton, or I was going to say ESOL, but it's not quite the same thing. as ESOL, although you could categorise people who have poor command of the language as needing extra support. The relationship side of it here is to reduce isolation. You know, some people can become quite absent if they don't feel they belong. Everyone wants to be in with the in crowd. A social interaction and social understanding is quite important as well. So there's quite a few there, which is speech, language and communication, which may not be what you thought it was going to be. Sentence structure, for example, helps people to put their language together. But there's another point about that, is that when we are supporting people to be more socially interactive and to be able to express and initiate conversations, they can become over-reliant on you or mix up those feelings of support with friendship, where actually what you're trying to do is make them more integrated, make a student more integrated, and sometimes you can get inappropriate attachments from that. So just be clear about your own role. That's another little cautionary tale there. Some students over-rely on you for their social understanding, and really our job is to make ourselves dispensable, that they don't need us to interact after a while. But here's a couple more things now. Self-help and independence. So self-help and independence, it says here, gain the explicit teaching of executive functioning skills and support in meeting the typical demands of daily living in relation to the diagnosis. So you might imagine here that we're talking about people who cannot live unaided, but it's much wider than that. It is, it could be people who, for example, the executive functions, I've put an explanation of executive functions here. A set of processes that all have to do with managing oneself and one's resources in order to achieve a goal. So that doesn't mean to say that somebody's got profound and multiple disabilities at all. It's the frontal lobe actually. It's people being able to manage their time, to be able to pay attention, to be able to plan and organise, to make them more independent as a learner. I mean, it could be that independent in life, you know, living skills, but it doesn't mean that completely. Also, executive function helps people to avoid doing and saying the wrong thing. Some people are born with very weak executive function. Someone like, some people might have ADHD, depression, learning disabilities. A brain injury might cause your executive functions to not be as active. It's this frontal lobe again. So that's another part of the EHCP, self-help and independence. And if you drilled that down a little bit further, there's a few more subcategories here. And you can see on the left that this would be somebody who has profound and multiple possibly, or has physical disabilities, and they need support for that. But you know, you could take that a lot wider, where people have poor mental health and they can't talk themselves round, they don't listen to advice, or they can't take on board advice, they're not aware of dangers. Do you see what I mean? So there's quite a large volume and width of this self-help and independence. But if you see that on a piece of information that's given to you by a student, then I would ask more about it. I think some of the self-care stuff on the left-hand side, that's going to be quite obvious to you, but some of the other stuff might not be. Ask for more information. Here's another one. This is a biggie, obviously. Social, emotional and behavioural. And in a mainstream environment, large numbers fall into this category. So this is about self-esteem, confidence, emotional health and coping mechanisms. It's resilience. It's the mindset, you know, it's all of those sorts of things. And a lot of it, if you're working with teenagers particularly, although we are seeing a lot more younger people under this category, then you may be dealing with anxiety on a number of different levels. And so, excuse me, what you see here is a diagram showing all kinds of reasons why people may display or feel anxious. You know, just the act of learning and taking exams can make you feel anxious, but if you've got also a learning difficulty or a learning disability that causes you to not feel comfortable in lots of different ways, then the anxiety will be heightened. So you could call that social, emotional and behavioural. And here's some subcategories for that. On the left, you'll notice some of them are quite about autism again. Can you see that? There's quite a lot there, which is about interaction and eye contact, etc. and providing support for that, but also mental health issues, you know, coping with change. I mean, that you could say that's someone on the spectrum, difficulty with transitions and things like that. But there are lots of people who can't cope with change and don't like change and have difficulties with lots of different areas. Friendships and physical aggression, you know, social and interaction skills. But we're talking a lot now these days about mental health and young people who are looked after. In other words, they're in foster care, or maybe they're in a supported living environment, that they lack some of the broader skills needed to keep going, to be resilient, to not get into temper fights, and to actually be where they're supposed to be and to see what's in it for them. A couple of little tips about that, and some of the things we know about social, emotional, behavioural challenges for people is that they are absent a lot. I know that people who are away from class because they've been poorly, whether it's because of depression or anxiety or part of their condition, then the one thing to get them back is to make them feel like they haven't missed too much, that they can't catch up. You want them to come back. And it's always good to get in touch with them to remind them of what they might have missed and collect handouts for them. Tell them, you know, you take work by email. And it's always better to do that by letter or email. Phone calls, they often don't want to speak to people if they're feeling a bit anxious. And when they come back to class or college or school, wherever it is that you're working, make sure that there's some catch-up time, supervised, made available for them. And I've organised someone that they can work with, discuss things, help them to unravel that a bit. Mostly I find that in my experience, some of these social, emotional and behavioural issues have been around students that feel unsafe. And maybe they've been on a temporary exclusion, and again they think they've missed so much there's no point in coming back, and it just sets them up to fail. So a few top tips there. So let's look at another one. Here's another reason why you might have an EHCP: physical, sensory and medical. So physical, it could be physical disabilities, definitely. Medical could be in a long-term illness where you're away a lot. Even some of the hospitals, I know they have wings where they have tutor groups and things like that, and so people who aren't in a mainstream situation may still be able to get extra support for tutoring outside of that, you know, the typical classroom environment. I've put placement in here because I know that sometimes parents would apply for an EHCP when they may not live in a catchment area of a school which is more able to meet the needs of their child. And interestingly, I was having a conversation with a college recently. They told me that for some students that they get asked to take, they've had to refuse them because they don't have the facilities. Now, whatever your view on that is, this is just I'm just telling you how it's been told to me. And obviously, according to the law, we're supposed to make reasonable adjustment, and they're not able to do that. They're not able to do that in their college. So they've had to consult a solicitor on how to legally refuse a placement. And I'm interested to know what happens afterwards, but they've told me that's what they've had to do, because the support is usually provided for parents to ensure their child will go somewhere, whereas some schools and colleges now are saying, well, we can't meet those needs, so they have to legally challenge it. So it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? Anyway, let's go back to physical, sensory and medical. The physical does apply to sensory. We know we talk often about the 5 senses, but on the autism spectrum there are 2 more, vestibular and proprioception, which are about balance and body position. So the physical side of it would actually be something that you might be supporting for, and I'll explain what I mean by that, because some of the difficulties caused by sensory issues, which are about the physical sense, it's spatial awareness. Crowded places particularly difficult, but also sitting still can cause dizziness. So it could be that one of the reasonable adjustments you need to make for someone who has difficulty with that is that they have regular seat breaks or even stand when they're in class. Novel idea, don't you think? There's other things here. Could be distracted easily by clutter and distressed by it. So that might be something that you would provide support for. If you go into an autism-friendly classroom, you'll notice that it's absolutely clear of stuff. And if you go into any classroom in mainstream, it really is not clear of stuff. One of the things I always recommend is doing a room audit. Go in and have a look. Are we creating a difficult environment for our students to be in? I don't know. I'll let you do that. Go and do a room audit. Last one here. Reasons why. Home to school transport. So it might be that the best opportunity, a parent might be applying for an EHCP because the child needs to go to X, Y and Z school and they need transport for it. And some special school placements will organise that. But that might be something on there. And referral to occupational therapy service, that's not normally something we would see in educational terms, I don't think. It might be on someone's EHCP, but we might not be privy to that information. Okay, so I've come to the end of all the categories and the subcategories. Now, I think you'll agree there is a lot there. So I've added a handout. You might be able to see it. It's a PDF document, Understanding It in EHCP handout, which is there for you to download to take it, because that'll give you back those key points that I've covered. But I'm going to take some questions from you in a moment. I just want to tell you about this. I must tell you about this because the bit we've just covered forms part of this Level 2 qualification, the Skills for Learning Support Practitioners. And we provide this training for individuals or for groups. We work with large teams in colleges and schools, and it covers a lot of subjects. And so there's a mandatory unit of which this EHCP forms part. To get the award, you have to do the mandatory unit, and then you choose 2 more topics, and you can see there's quite a lot to choose from. So there's 11 altogether, the mandatory plus 10. So the role of a learning support practitioner is mandatory, and then you can choose supporting learners with, and then any of those. So if you're working in that arena, or you want to get some validation for the work that you're probably already doing, then it's quite a good qualification to have. It's OCN, it's national qualification. You can get it as an award, extended award or certificate, but to get the award you have to do the mandatory unit and then 2 of the other units from the optional group. So if you want to know more about that, just ask me. We're running quite a lot of those at the moment, and they're going really well, and they form part of a rounded career approach to being a learning support practitioner. So, questions, anyone? I'm going to just click onto the question pane and see what we've got. Okay, deaf. Yes, deaf or hard of hearing. Well, the difference between deaf and hard of hearing is that we have people who with the deaf are born deaf. So that would be that they are profoundly deaf. They can't, they don't speak because they have probably learnt British Sign Language or something like that. And the other deaf with a small d, or hard of hearing you might call it, would be the people who've perhaps got some hearing loss or have lost hearing later, and they do speak and can lip read and things like that, and maybe do sign, but they are hard of hearing. So that's the difference between deaf and hard of hearing. Okay, right. Emma, have you any guidance about how to carry out the EHCP reviews? Not personally, I don't, but if you want to email me that question, that I will try and put you in touch with somebody who does have that, okay? I'm not at the front line as much as I used to be, so I know that people are, and they may be able to help you. So if you email me to remind me, I can forward that request on to someone else. Have you all managed to see the handout? Because it's there. If you want to take it, then you just have to download it. Okay, we've got rest breaks in lessons. There is a medical rest break timeout cards at my school, but how can we put this in practice in the classroom? Well, it's funny because rest breaks is one thing. Sometimes a rest break doesn't need to be out of the classroom. It can be a pause in learning in order to have a brain break, really. Or it could be a bit of movement will provide you with a brain break. But if it's a medical reason, then, I mean, if you have a medical condition where you need a break, then surely they can go and either have something to read or be presented with catch-up notes to have later. I think that the thing about having breaks is actually it's good for everyone. I reckon if you applied a lot of rules around ADHD, such as a 15 to 20 minute concentration span, etc., if you applied that to all of your students, I don't think anybody would be disadvantaged, frankly. At the end of the day, the modern classroom is full of modern people who are used to having multiple things to think and feel, and if we don't provide that environment, then they're not going to cope very well. Okay, EHCP is not accepted by universities. I have to say, legally, that is probably very easy to challenge, except I work with and have worked with a number of students of sort of at college 18-year-olds who are hoping to go to university, and what we're doing is providing them with skills to take with them, because you just won't get the kind of support in university as you do in a classroom in secondary or further. And the reason for that is because the whole university system is made up of lectures where you would go and take notes and then go off and work independently for the most part, unless it's a practical subject. But it's not geared up for it, and it does have to change. I think it's just one of those slow processes that the system of EHCP, which takes you up to 25, hasn't really embedded in that higher education. As far as I'm aware, it can be challenged. So maybe you should get in touch with IPSEA, ipsea.com. The other thing about, of course, the post-16 is if they haven't got an EHCP yet, it just has to be in process, and they will have had something else before that. So the way I see it is if you haven't got an updated one, there will be something in their history. So ask for it, make the request, because even if it's not completely up to date, there will be information in there that you know what kind of support your student has had previously, and then you can work on that and build on it, make it contextualised for the age that they are now. Right, Magdalena, what do you think about colleges not updating the EHCP before the student leaves college? Well, here we go. As far as I'm aware, the colleges have to just provide information about the support that has been given. When I was full-time, we used to have moving on books, or the equivalent of, a written description of what we had done and what we were now letting go of, which the student could take with them. So it provided an overall picture. But again, if you want to email me that question, I'll see if I can find someone who can give you a more definitive answer about that, okay? Yes, EHCP informs the DSA document. Indeed it does. But, it shouldn't be something that it's a local authority's job to keep that going. The colleges and schools are supposed to feed into it, but I don't think they're responsible for the end result. The best thing you can do is to provide information about the kind of support that you've been being given to the student, and then what improvements there were, you know, what effect it had, so that the next stage of their life they can actually use that information. It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? But I have to say, you really must go on to IPSIA. There are lots of questionnaires on there. It's mostly for parents, but I think you'll find that as educators there will be things on there that will help to guide you, okay? Well, that's it. It's over now, everyone. It's very warm where I am, so if it's warm where you are, I highly recommend that you step outside and get some sunshine. Thanks a lot for your participation, and I will see you very soon. I just want to let you know that we've got a few more things coming up webinars-wise. I'm going to do one on assertiveness in class, so that's a bit around behaviour, obviously, and developing a social skills program. This is something that Laura Kirby talked to me about some time ago, so we're going to rerun that one in due course. So I will let you know when they're happening and you can enrol for them. Thanks again, and if you've got any queries, just let me know. Here's my email address on the screen. Bye for now.